Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Today's special guest is experienced field archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Well, good morning, good evening, good day, people. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and my special guest is Dr. David Graves. He received his PhD from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. Today, we got a very interesting program. I'm not going to give it away, but we have a small collection of artifacts going on. Hopefully, we'll get to some of it, especially one or two. You know, we're always willing to show different artifacts. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited. Of course, I got a heads up because we start a little bit earlier. We talk about what we're going to say and which direction the podcast is going to go. And then we say, well, okay, so here we are. A lot of fun. Hey, before we get
Morning,
going,
George.
Hey, good morning. How are you doing? I just want to show this David Graves coloring books right here. Very interesting. And also inside is labeling many of the artifacts that we have talked about in the podcast. So if you want something educational and also for the kids, I would say the information here is also good for adults. Check out his coloring books, Dr. Graves coloring books. All right. Hey, Dr. Graves, what do you have in store for us today for the archaeology?
Well, today we're going to talk about the crucifixion and some of the archaeology that surrounds that. There's been a discovery of a couple of heel bones, and we're going to talk about those. And we're going to look kind of a deep dive into the crucifixion. And I've got probably about a chapter or maybe two chapters in my book on the key themes of the New Testament that deals with the crucifixion and all the background on that and the Romans and some of the quotes. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that, but you can do a deep dive if you want even further in my book on the key themes of the New Testament. That's what we've got in store. And I see you've got a few artifacts hanging around there that looks how they might have recorded some of the things we're going to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. You know, I was trying to figure out a way how to justify these artifacts because it's kind of removed from the topic. So, you know, we work on other projects. We call them shorts, and that might be advertisements as well. So in doing so, these are preparations of museum items along with reproductions. So here we have some 2,000-year-old inkwells, very similar to what they found at Qumran. So they found bronze inkwells at a building called the Scriptorium, but also they found terracotta inkwells. That's what I got right here. Now, ink can dry up, so in some cases they actually found lids. Now, I don't have lids for the smaller bronze ones, but there's evidence for lids as well for these little.
It could also, having worked over there, it could also keep the flies out of your ink.
Oh, you know, that's right. Keep the flies out of the ointment. Let's see, what else I have up here is a small representation of a Qumran amphora with a lid. All right. Now, the reason why I did this real quick is that sometimes, let's say they're in a hurry to maybe stash their manuscripts. And in doing so, they forgot the very common oil lamp. You know, like, hey, we got everything. Hey, yeah, let's go. So what'd you do with that? Did you bring the oil lamp? No. Did you bring the oil lamp? No. We forgot our oil lamp. What are you going to do? Well, they take their lids, they turn them upside down, they fill them with oil. They make great lamps too. Do we have evidence of this? Well, some scholars have suggested that we do. Here's a lid, as you can see. And if you look very carefully, you can see on the outside where it's been burnt. You got little soot marks.
Now, George,
So yes, sir.
For the audience to realize the one you're holding in your hand right now is more of the actual size.
Yes.
The one that you were showing, that's the reproduction. So the little miniature of it. So that's not the size of the oil lamp. That's the one you're holding in your hand would be the size, just so they don't get confused.
Right. Well, you know, if I had an actual one, you couldn't see my pretty face because of all the, great big amphoras sitting here.
Yeah.
But
No, that's
you're
good. I've got one
absolutely
of those.
right. So this one would be maybe foot and a half, maybe 2 feet in height, and then probably about this wide. And of course, the lids are much bigger too. It'd be like this, right? Maybe even bigger.
Yeah.
And there's different types of lids. So if it doesn't look exactly like that, well, it doesn't have to. It's just a lid. The reason for this is it's interesting that where these manuscripts put away, what is that called? Where a scroll is a living, it's a living word. So you don't burn your scrolls, you put them away. What is that called? Where you put where the Jewish community puts their scrolls.
Yeah, it's a
You know what I'm
sacred
saying?
place. I know the name. I'll have to look it up, but it's a
Yeah, we're gonna have
sacred
to
place.
insert the name in there.
Yeah,
But
I'll insert the name.
so some scholars have suggested this as well. When they're hiding the scrolls, was it just because these scrolls were old and this is what they did? Or were they hiding the scrolls because the Roman army was heading their way and they wanted to preserve that because in their belief in the new age that the Messiah was going to come, if they, out of faith, faced the Roman army and they were victorious, they would go back and retrieve their scrolls. Well, of course, the scrolls are there, so they were not victorious. If it was done in haste, would they forget their lamps? Possibly. Could that be a reason? Now, this is just suggesting that we find these lids with burnt marks on them. It's just a suggestion. Maybe so, but it's interesting, right?
It is.
And it is part of archaeology. And Dr. David Graves, if you thought this was interesting, wait for his program on the crucifixion. David, go ahead because you got
Okay.
something
Well,
really interesting coming up.
we're going to segue into the crucifixion today because a lot of the information that we know about the crucifixion comes from ancient writers. So the folks at Qumran were not the only people that did writing. There were scribes, there were all kinds of philosophers, there were all kinds of ancient historians that also wrote, and we know about the crucifixion from their writings. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So we're going to talk about the heel bone of called the Givat HaMivtar heel bone discovered. Now, a lot of times people talk about the cross. People wear them around their necks, and you see various types. Sometimes you see them even as an X. But the Roman cross was composed of a couple of pieces of wood, cross beam, as we would call it. It's called the patibulum, and then you have the stipes, that is the vertical section, and then you have the saddle, little piece of wood that was stuck there where they could put their feet on. Now, in some cases, the evidence shows us that their feet on the sides nailed inward, the sides into the sides of it. So they sort of straddled it. But again, there's various different types of way they would crucify. Sometimes they would nail their hands to the top, to the patibulum, or sometimes they would tie a rope around their wrists. Now, the nails were not generally nailed into the palms of the hands. Evidence shows us that they were usually nailed into the wrist because that would hold the individual on the cross. And then the titulus crucis, this is the title that was placed on the cross that we have evidence of in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek above Jesus's head in his case. But in the other cases, they would list their crimes and why they were being crucified and so forth. There's a close-up of a gentleman carrying the patibulum. So the ankle bone that was discovered, this is a reproduction of one here, and it's one of the earliest skeletal evidences for crucifixion in the ancient Near East. So it's one of the earliest. Now I'm going to show some earlier ones. So that claim that some have made on some people's websites is not really accurate. But this does show how the heel bone went through the side. See how the nail penetrates through the ankle bone and then into the cross. However, in 2007, another example emerged from a site in Gavelio, Italy, about 75 kilometers outside of the city of Venice. And this skeletal remains was found during some digging to put a pipe in. And his right calcaneus also shows holes, and it's been interpreted as evidence of a nail driven through the heel, and likely prior to his death. And near Jerusalem, there was an ossuary there that was discovered, and we'll talk about ossuaries in another podcast, possibly. They're bone boxes just north of Jerusalem near Mount Scopus. It dates to the 1st century, and it contains the remains of a crucified man. His bones are picked up, and after the flesh is eaten off of them, they're all placed inside of a bone box, and one was discovered with a nail in it. So again, it helps us with our practice of the Roman crucifixion. We're not saying, of course, making sure that I clear with our evidence here, we're not saying this particular individual, that heel bone is Jesus's, or even of the two men that were at the cross, because there were thousands and thousands of people crucified. But it does give us examples of how the nail was used, how the person was nailed to a cross. There's been a lot of debate, of course, over was he tied to the crossbeam or was he nailed? That is, was Jesus nailed or was he tied to the crossbeam? Question is took a dramatic turn in 1968 when this particular heel bone was discovered, showing clear evidence that indeed they did use nails. The site was excavated by a team of archaeologists led by Vasilios Severas. He uncovered the remains of about 35 individuals, 9 of whom were violently killed. One of those was this particular individual. I know he wasn't Jesus, but he was Johanan. This is John. And one of these was opened up, one of these ossuaries was opened up. A 20-year-old man was inside. From around 7 AD, there were about 66 of them found in ossuaries, these crucified individuals. And of course, we know that was a turbulent period, and the Romans were persecuting the Jews in the area, called the Jewish revolt. And his remains were examined by a Professor Haas. He was an anthropologist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, their medical school. And he determined that the remains belonged to a man in his 20s who was crucified somewhere around 87. And the time period, of course, is the start of the Jewish revolt. Now, some of the statistics we have here. Here we have the chronological apex. So before the 3rd century BC, we have the earliest recorded nailing, including 7 documented instances with 4 cases in the 3rd century and 2 in the 2nd century and 3 in the 1st century. You'll see here the different centuries on the bottom. And where we have an increase in the evidence is at the 1st century, where they rise up to about 21. So the frequency of nailings declines after the 1st century with 7, and then peters off even further into the 4th century. But the 1st century is the time period when there was a high instance of this practice of nailing people to crosses. Now, as we break it down even further, the 1st century, the geographical distinctions is we have 7 in Judea, 13 in the rest of the Roman Empire. We have 1 in Greece, none in Carthage, with a total in the 1st century of 21. So a lot of them were in Judea that we have evidence for, but they were also scattered throughout the Roman Empire with 13 and just 1 in Greece. So practiced throughout Rome, but there seems to be a high concentration of them here in Judea. Here's a combination of those two bar charts. You can see the different time periods. There seems to be this high concentration here in the 1st century with the red one here in Judea, the rest of Rome combined. So the Romans were using this practice pretty strongly in Judea. We have evidence of this iron nail that still remained in his heel bone of the one that was excavated here at the ossuary. We'll show a close-up of it here in a few minutes, but you can see here the end of the nail is actually bent, making it difficult to remove from the olive wood, which may explain why it was still in the heel bone. Difficult to pull it back out through the heel as well. The wood may have just deteriorated over time, whereas the bone and the nail remained. And the nails were driven through the wrists as well as the heel, because the palm wouldn't be able to support the humans, as I mentioned earlier. And the ancient writers considered the wrist a part of the hand. So when it says that the nails were put into his hand, the ancient writers, as they would describe this, considered the wrist as part of the hand in their anatomy. We know that from the medical records. Ellen, the doctor, and of course Luke is a doctor as well. There's a piece of acacia wood between the hand and the nail and its foot. Perhaps the nail in it prevented slipping over the head of the nail, so it couldn't come out, keeping the person there when they struggled. And another thing we noticed is that his leg was broken when they autopsy on him. And it's called in Latin crucifragium, from which we get our word crucifixion in John chapter 19. And so the crucified man's legs had straddled, as I had mentioned, the sides of the beam, and then were nailed from the side into the beam, as evidenced here by the heel bone. And then the man was probably tied to the crossbeam to hold him up, hold him there. This particular individual that was excavated had no traumatic injuries to his arms or his forearms. So while this does support the literary description of crucifixion in the New Testament, the conclusions drawn are not only based on just one archaeological discovery, but they're based on a couple of discoveries and a bunch of other archaeological evidence as well. So there's a close-up of it. I think, George, you have a close-up of one of these as well?
Okay, yes, I do. I'll wait till after your presentation, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah, I think we'll stop it right there now, George, for today.
Okay.
We'll pick up some of the other material later. I think
All
this
right.
is a good place to stop today. And
So, yeah, we got a number of course, authentic artifacts here, and also reproduction. So notice sometimes people, when we talk about the artifacts, we do want to represent them correctly, which are authentic and which are reproduction. And a reason for that is sometimes some artifacts can be very sensitive, and we don't want to disrespect it at all. And such as this one right here that David's talking about. Of course, this is a copy of the one that is displayed in the Israel Museum. I believe you said it was found in the 1960s.
yeah, 68.
All right, and it is a heel bone of I'm going to say a young man because I'm in my 60s. He's in his 20s. And of course, when you see this, it was found in an ossuary box. Simply that means a limestone bone box, not a sarcophagus. Now behind me is like a sarcophagus, the length of the human body, but a ossuary is just for collecting the bones of the deceased. So they collected the bones of a relative, more likely, because it is a family tomb, and placed it in an ossuary box. And this is where they found this particular crucifixion item. All right, so here you can see what David was talking about as the nail is penetrating an ankle bone. And on the side right here, I don't know if you can see it. Let me say something white like my hand. There you can see where
Yeah,
it's
that
bent.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you can see that something happened. Some have suggested it hit a knot in the wood, which bent it, which means that it could not be pulled out. It was stuck. So what they did is they detached the ankle separately from the vertical beam and then placed it into the ossuary box, right?
And that could explain why we don't find a lot of them, because an unbent nail could be pulled completely out of the heel bone, and the wood looks like they had trouble with that one. They couldn't get the nail out because of the bend in it, so that's why it ended up in the ossuary. They said, "Oh, chuck the whole thing in there. We don't have time. We're in a hurry. Let's just put those bones in there." And that's why we find it in this particular case. But as I said, there was another one found in Italy that's more recent, and it was from a 30-year-old man. So 20s and 30s, criminals, folks doing bad stuff.
Giving everybody an idea of its size
Yeah.
and dimension.
Yeah, that's good.
And because sometimes if we want to display it like you did in your PowerPoint, it can be quite a bit larger, or seemingly. But this is the actual copy representation. Matter of fact, yeah.
And some of the ancient writers wrote about the crucifixion outside of the Bibles. We have Tacitus, he wrote. We have Seneca, one of the ancient Roman writers. He writes about it. Pretty gruesome description. Josephus,
Right,
he mentions
Josephus.
him. Yep, he mentions him as well. So those references are in my book if you wanted to read them in more detail, but they're pretty gruesome.
He mentions that there would be like miles of crucifixions, thousands of people being crucified So you could be seeing, like, you'd be walking down the road and there'd be like many crucifixions.
Yep.
And you think each one would be in its state of either suffering or decomposition. And you can imagine it was up there for also to be feasted by the animals. So the birds would flock around it. And if you had a relative there, that would be just a very horrible, horrible thing.
And then we have some iconic evidence. So it's a graffiti here of a man in the form of a donkey, and his name was Alaxamos, worships his god, is what the phrase says there. It dates to the late first century, and likely the mockery of these early Christians depicted as a cross with a horizontal beam consistent with the Roman practice. It was a crucified man with a donkey's head, and that's because the Christians were being blamed and that their god was a donkey. And then there's also a gem with a crucified figure on it with nails in the hands and feet from the 2nd to 3rd century AD. So there's a close-up of it right there, Alexamenos. That was found in Rome, depicting Jesus as a donkey. And that was their attitude. Alexamenos worships his god.
Laxamenos, that's a Greek name, isn't it?
Yep.
So does that really determine that well, it could be he's a representation of the thoughts of Christianity at the time? Jesus?
This was
It's a
Greek,
mockery of Christianity then.
yeah, it's a mock of Christianity. Alexamenos was considered a Christian, and they were mocking him, saying, "Oh, look at that! He's worshiping his god, a donkey." And we actually have in scriptural references to this practice in some of the writings. Tertullian says, "For like some others, you are under the delusion that our God is an ass's head," as we see here depicted in the graffiti.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Tertullian confirms that Christians were accused of worshiping a divinity with the head of an ass. So they were well, so Tertullian here traces the roots of his belief back to Tacitus, who believed that the Israelites were led out of Egypt by an ass or by a donkey. This is where this idea of the donkey comes from. Kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's
And then,
interesting. Who believed that Israelites were led out of Egypt by an ass? Now, do we have any evidence of where that viewpoint originated or comes from?
well, yeah, the
Other than this,
Israelites in the Old Testament
yeah,
coming
but
out of
they're
Egypt
led out by an ass. I mean, you see what I
by their
mean?
God, and they represent that by their God. It's all
Who started that type of propaganda? You know, well, the Israelites. Well, they came out by
well,
an ass, and like it's a mockery.
Tacitus brings it up, and then it's picked up by Tertullian, one of the Christian early church fathers.
Okay.
That's where he says they get the idea from Tacitus. Tacitus, who knows where he got the idea from, could have even been some of the early Jewish writings. And then Tertullian says, carried about in public a caricature of us Christians with this label, begotten of a donkey. Now, this figure has the ass's ears, was dressed in a toga with a book, having a hoof on one of his feet. The crowds believed this infamous Jew. That's what Tertullian had said. So we'll stop it there.
Okay, before you take your PowerPoint down, I would like to return to a slide that you did where it talked about an amulet, a ring with the image of a crucifixion on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I thought I caught something that I think our listening audience would like to be aware of. And I'm surprised. There, a carved gemstone, possibly a magical amulet. It shows a crucifixion, a crucified figure with nails. Now, this is what I don't know for sure. Now, here's this. Were people collecting items from the crucifixions, thinking that these could be talisman or amulets that would ward off evil spirits? So maybe one of the reasons why we don't have more evidence of crucifixions, people were collecting it as talisman.
Yeah, some suggested that
because I've never,
yeah,
but I could see in certain cultures, of course, how that could happen. Because I thought maybe the listening audience, if they didn't catch that, Because this is interesting too, because we can reflect it. They say, oh, gross. But we can reflect some of that on our culture, which could be done pretty innocently.
And
Because
we also need
go
to
ahead.
remember that, the Christians used the cross for many years and still do as a symbol for, we might say good luck, but it's a
Protection.
yeah, it's a symbol of, it's a positive symbol in Christianity.
Mhm.
So there's no doubt in my mind that they believed in this sort of magical amulet idea. It comes out of Egypt. The whole ancient Near East had this idea. Mesopotamian medicine was all focused around magical spells, casting out illnesses and demons and things from sick people. And so there was this whole undercurrent of spiritual, magical powers and ideas that
But we have that
circulate.
in our culture today as well.
Exactly, yes.
And like I'm in New Mexico, so we have our Native Americans that have their maybe it's not the right word, talisman for the Native Americans, but in general, and
Yep,
like you said, Christians have it. I know that Jews do have it too.
yep.
So
So the reason we may not have a lot of these nails is because that the families may have kept them as sort of some kind of a magical amulet, or for whatever reasons. Maybe they
uh,
took two of them and made them into a cross.
mhm.
You know,
We do have this. Not I shouldn't say we. I don't know what people believe, but keeping items of relatives, keeping their thoughts present. It could be
yep.
a watch. It could be how many have inherited rings, jewelry from relatives, Yeah. So,
Something of meaning to the family, and
right. Something, whether it be like, okay, let's say that, and not out of disrespect. Now, I served in the military, and you serve in the military long enough, you're going to have friends that get injured and die. And what is returned to the family, but is sometimes the uniforms, sometimes the medals, and of course the dog tag. And those are kept, and sometimes are actually displayed in the home as a honorable representation of the service of their child. Because when I say child, it doesn't matter if that's your baby. It doesn't matter if he or she is 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. That's still your baby. You know what I mean? So,
remember in the Old Testament period, you get back into the Bronze period and Iron Age period. You have the ancient people would bury sometimes their children or family members, in their underneath the floorboards of their home, and we've excavated with one of those at one time. So,
what do you mean we,
and
you?
personally, I did, yes, I did, and
Yeah,
but also there were other found at the excavations of
right. I
other
understand that.
places, we as archaeologists, but also they found pottery inside of the jar,
Mhm.
small pieces of pottery. So something special that was of memory of that individual, they would keep and bury them with that individual as well. So it goes back to what you were saying about keeping things special for memory.
And that's true because, and in different times like the Middle Bronze Age and Late Bronze Age or Iron Age, customs change. So let's say early on, I don't know exactly the content of your excavation, but I think in the Middle Bronze Age, and maybe even the Early Bronze Age, I'll just say the Middle Bronze Age. I don't want to get too confusing. Relatives were
Yeah,
buried somewhere close to the residential area of where they lived, and sometimes under the foundation of the house. Sometimes.
this particular one was under an Iron Age room kitchen area.
Mm.
So, but it was found with, I think, some Middle Bronze pottery. So it may have been from an earlier period, but
All
they
right.
kept
And
using the houses over and over and
right.
over again.
In the Jewish communities, they would bury their deceased away from the domestic areas.
Good
And
point.
it was thought of as being unclean.
Good point.
Okay, that's a thought. But then, of course, according to the Torah and the law. Here we turn around in Christianity. Oh man, you go to an old enough church, like a New England church, we got them buried in the floor, in the wall, in the ceiling, in a graveyard around the church. We got them everywhere.
True.
But this is the way it is.
Yep. Practices have changed from time period to time period.
Mhm.
Well, a good segue from the writing utensils to the ancient individuals who wrote about crucifixion. So they're a good
Yes.
segue. And
We got the inkwell. We got a
yeah,
reed
show some of
stylus.
those styluses there, George, and show the
Oh, yes.
difference in
Okay. Well,
styluses.
I got different things that probably don't go exactly with the artifact. But here we have two different inkwells, one with the lid, because we want to keep flies out of the ointment, and here you would dip it in. And here you got a little piece of parchment right here. You could write on the, not parchment, papyrus. You can write on the
Virus
papyrus. Yeah. And of course, if you want to write at night, you got to have a lamp. And then we got some ink wells, bronze ones without lids, but there is evidence, once again, with lids. And you can use a stylus with those too, a little reed stylus.
Is that
Now,
what's that stylus made out of?
this one right here, I
Yeah.
don't know. It looks like it's wood. It's just wood. It's just cut sharp on the edge.
Okay, like a reed stylus. Yeah.
It's supposed to look like a period. And then I have another item right here. It's made out of iron. You can see it's got a
Oh.
little flat. It's got a little flat tip on it right here. It's flat. All
Yeah,
right.
exactly. And that's useful.
All right, but see, this isn't used for ink. No. This would be more than likely. I'll just say more than likely, possibly, because the Romans also had documents in wax. So you could write this in the wax, but if you make a mistake, the flat edge, you just smooth it out
Exactly.
and try it again. So I think this was used on wax for wax writing. All right.
Yeah.
Where the reed more likely was used for the ink.
I'll show a box. I have a box, a wax.
Oh,
book
yes.
that you can open up and you can see the area where they would put the wax on the inside. At our site, we found many tablets, wax tablets. They would put wax
Yes.
on the tablet and write on it.
There's one movie that comes to mind where there's a quick scene where they actually use a wax tablet and write on it. And that's when they were negotiating a gambling deal, because at the end there was a chariot race and they were gambling on whose horses was going to win and the amount they wanted to gamble. So they come out and they write something in the wax tablet, and this guy has a seal ring, and right away he goes warm it up and then stamps it, and he closes the box. And that was the end of the scene, but it lasts for maybe about 30 seconds. So
Cool.
Ben-Hur, if you want to see somebody use an actual box, very good representation in that movie. I love that movie, but it's like 1959, 1960. Who's in it? Charlton Heston or something like that? Same one as Moses? I think.
George, I've never been her. I've always been him.
Okay. Oh my God. Folks, this has got nothing to do with gender stuff. Ben-Hur. But you know what? Ben means son of
Exactly.
her family. And her family actually is documented as one that came out of Egypt. It's a well documented. So in other words, it is a very renowned, established family being represented in the movie. So there, David.
And a good period film like
Yes.
Ben-Hur as well as Masada. So there's some good period films out there for people to watch. So
Right.
highly recommend it.
Yes, sir. So today we talked about the ankle, or Dr. David Graves talked about the ankle bone. And here's the representation. And also we listed some artifacts and how they would be used for documenting evidence of crucifixion. So I hope everybody's enjoyed this program. I know I did. I enjoyed your presentation and of course your PowerPoint. And everybody, thanks for being a part of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Right now, we're like 193,000 subscribers, thanks to you. And we really appreciate it. We got a lot of stuff also planned. I know David's been working very, very hard editing our last interview with a number of scholars. So here we're going to have those up pretty quickly. So watch our posting, Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. I think this one's going to be on the Herculaneum and how they deciphered some ancient scrolls. And it's fascinating by an individual who was, you could say, a key factor in the ability to translate or the translating of the scrolls.
The pioneer of virtual unwrapping of papyri.
You got a better way to say it, mate, more technical, but this is what you get when you get to Aberdeen.
Well, that's what I titled it, so I could remember it. Good,
right.
George. Had fun today. Thanks.
Thank you very much for being a part, and everybody out there, have a great week. Have a great day. Thank you.